Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Jeff Kim. Welcome to Education for Love and Wisdom EDUG 508 mock Love and Wisdom presentations on strategies to support new and emergent plurilingual students. And I know oftentimes students that are new and emergent plurilingual students come into our classrooms. Here at Vanguard University, we're ready to love them with love and wisdom and with strategies that can support them. We have today the EDUG class fall 2023, who will be providing a number of different strategies that you can select from that will allow you to support students. They will be sharing about what the strategy is, how a teacher might use it to help students learn, and how students can use it to benefit as well. We're going to kick it off with Mr. Zachary Kruger.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Kim. So today I'm going to be talking and focusing primarily on plurilingual students and the idea of allowing them to teach us other languages. Now, the thing is, primarily, this is going to be with probably Spanish. Over 80% of all plurilingual students speak Spanish as a secondary language or primary. There are going to be other languages, but that's probably the most that we're going to deal with. And in my opinion, foundationally, what we really want to do is send the right message when we're implementing this strategy. And this is where this comes in. You know, it's all about encouraging other languages to be brought into the classroom. Something you have to understand is some of these students, especially their parents, they are coming from a background where this is actually the opposite. When their parents were growing up, it was discouraged. All right. When you're in an English teaching class, that's what you talk about. You just use English. Don't bring in your culture. Don't bring in your other languages. Don't confuse other students. And so that may not be what students are being discouraged in the classroom, but the parents, at the very least, that's what they are kind of thinking about. So they're not encouraging their students probably. So what we want to do is say, hey, this is an environment where we encourage this. Figure out, hey, who is plurilingual? You know, make that something that's positive. Make them think, hey, this is good that I am. And looking at the next slide, something we want to do is we want to ask the students for a response. Okay, we want to bring them in. I remember what I said in the beginning, we want to allow them to teach us. So first and foremost, let's keep it simple. If you're anything like me, all right, you don't know much about other languages. All right, I did do Spanish throughout high school. Did I remember most of it? Gonna be honest, not really. But that is where the students come in. All right, when you're keeping it simple and allowing them to teach you, you can ask them for something as simple as a word, and what random words you could implement into your classroom. And that pretty much is a great segue to our next slide, because what we want to do is apply this into our class. All right, now we're not making a lesson plan about plurilingual students. All right, we have our subjects to teach, but it's something as simple as, instead of saying you all have 5 minutes to talk with your partner, you could easily say, hey, you all have 5 minutos to talk with your partner. All right, that might sound childish, like, oh, okay, what difference is that going to make? But it's using the step-by-step process. And going to the next slide, you know, technology is going to be your number one friend in this. Okay, if you don't understand words or you need help, maybe you can just bring in some words. All right, maybe you start off that. Don't ask the students necessarily, but bring it in yourself. Google Translate's amazing. And these are just some simple words of saying hello in other languages. You have ni hao, you have shalom. All right, all of these great ways to just very easy. When a student comes in, hey, shalom, they're like, hey, what's that mean? Oh, it means hello in Hebrew. Oh, cool. And going to the last slide, really what we want to do is we want to get everyone involved. This is something that kind of goes back to the beginning of our foundation. We want the students involved in this. You know, we aren't teaching them a lesson on how to speak another language. There's classes for that, but it's implementing it so they know it's encouraged, and it's a very easy plug and play for us to encourage it in this environment so they can learn, okay, this is a safe place And this is good for me to learn more, especially for students that may not know other languages, for them to say, oh, yeah, I want to know that as well. So super easy for all you teachers out there. Don't have to do a lot of forethought to it. You can even just ask those students. And that is going to be a great way for all of you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Zachary Kruger. What an asset-based view of our students, to think that they have knowledge to bring to the classroom and that it should be used to enhance the knowledge of others, even our newcomer and plurilingual students. That's a very loving and wise way to respond. Now I'm going to introduce our next person to you, Miss Hannah Wilms, who's going to be talking about the power of poetry.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. So first of all, what is poetry? And in a simple definition, poetry is something along the lines of writing in a more fluid standard and bringing emotion into your writing. So typically in our classrooms, we're asking students to write research papers or look into things, but poetry is more of an evolution into emotion and personal life, or they can take it a totally different route and maybe look into someone else's life and write a poem somewhere along those lines. The interesting thing about poetry is that it's been around in our world for a very long time, basically meaning that there is poetry in other languages that we can introduce to our plurilingual students to allow them to build connections. And then also regarding this student value line, this translanguaging we see happens a lot in poetry, where we're actually seeing two different languages coexist in one form of art. And that's something that's going to be super valuable to plurilingual students and can also be introduced to primarily English speakers to introduce some Spanish language or French language into their work and into their writing. So cutting back over to our teacher value, first of all, unlike Zach, our last presenter was speaking about, this is actually something that you're going to see in your curriculum that you want to introduce. So you can make this a unit plan, a whole lesson plan. This can be a year-long endeavor of poetry, whatever you want it to be, but it is bringing a form of art into your classroom. And art and dance and movement are all things that we're learning are incredibly valuable to showcase in our classroom instead of having them sit down and show off an assignment. Adding this emotion and this art for them is going to be incredibly valuable. The next big part about this that's going to be both student value and teacher value is connection. So we're allowing students to show off as much as they want to, or they can refrain and keep that language to themselves, or whatever they're trying to represent can be shown to the class or kept to themselves. And this can also just adjust based on assignments. If it's not wanting to be an emotional personal assignment, you can make it about something in history. A big part of poetry is that it can refer to history, it can refer to current day, it can even refer to things in the future. Poetry is timeless and can be based on any sort of project you want. It's also going to establish a new style of writing. So our plurilingual students are going to have a difficult time with doing possibly like big research papers or big projects like that, especially if they're ELL learners, things like that. So if we're allowing them to have a style of writing that is purely emotional based and comes off of no research basically, then we're simply allowing them to speak from the heart and write from the heart and be able to present that individually from the class. Finally, over here on your student value, one important thing to note here is that everyone is born with the sense of beat and rhythm. Sometimes it's hard to write research papers for plurilingual students due to the very high expectations and layout that's required for writing research papers. But with poetry, everyone is born knowing beat, knowing rhythm in some sort of fashion. And poetry is really going to follow the flow of their own heart. So that leaves them very limited expectations to where they could feel like they're behind other classmates or possibly not. Finally, it's just an opportunity to explore culture. So you have options of having them write about poetry about historical things, or they can write poetry about themselves or something they're experiencing or going through. And they can even write poetry in a third person point of view, writing about someone else in life and things like that. So at the end of the day, poetry is going to be a big move for you in your classroom.
Thank you so much, Miss Hannah Wilms. I think we're all feeling the power of poetry and planning to use it in our classroom, really being able to tap into the emotions of our students and allow for that translanguaging, as Miss Wilms so artfully shared. Now we're going to move on to Mr. Jorge Marquez. He's going to talk about community building as a way to support our new and emergent plurilingual students with love and wisdom, Mr. Jorge Marquez.
Thank you, Professor Kim, for the introduction. So kind of to get it rolling, what is community building? It's a strategy that is utilized by a large amount of teachers to kind of create and foster a community or a sense of community within the classroom. There is no necessary right way to community build. There are multiple avenues in which you can take to community build, and I've kind of included some at the bottom through the various pictures, but community building allows for students to interact with one another and build upon their relationships. Community building activities can act as a catalyst for future relationships and development to occur, in which they start off as friend or just classmates, and then they can build a relationship to friendships, best friendships, and maybe even like lifelong partners at the end of class, or co-workers, or whatever it may be. These three images here are just small examples of community building, which include like having your digital locker, decorating it, expressing yourself, a teacher standing in front of the door, greeting their students and asking how their day was, or even as like technological with these new games where you can have multiplayer games and having students play with them, talking to one another, building upon that relationship to, in a sense, create that community. So if we can actually go into the next slide, we'll actually learn ways that teachers can use this learning strategy and actually move their class forward. The way I had like really saw community building when I was reading through it was it actually it can establish like tone and routines that teachers might be not necessarily trying to establish, but students can understand that and really have that as a comfort zone. These activities can reveal to the students that the teachers, like what their moral is, what their intentions, and various other instructional strategies that they may be using to hopefully understand some comfort, reduce anxiety, so on and so forth. And finally, community building activities can be used as icebreakers in the sense that they can lead to inclusive and promote well-organized discussions that, will again move forward the class. Ways students can use community building. Again, students can have a sense of that what they have to say matters to the class. One example of this is social contracts, in which students all around can pitch in their voices and say, hey, we'd like for the class to be well organized, open-minded, so on and so forth, building upon these morals and always referring back to them. That way, these morals are really the heart of the class. Again, icebreakers. These will ensure that students are never feeling isolated or alone. A big issue that EL students constantly have to overcome simply because teachers might put them to the back or others can't relate to their issues. Icebreakers will allow them to connect with one another and gain the sense of community. And finally, students, when realizing the community building activities, can have their confidence built upon. They ask questions that they might normally not have done without these activities, to peers, to teachers, to tutors, which will then lead to better understandings of various concepts, which will in turn lead to an improvement on various activities, homeworks, quizzes, and exams. From my experience, I've seen community building being utilized in classrooms, and I could not picture a class without these activities. Thank you.
Mr. Jorge Marquez, reminding us of universal design for learning. First, connecting to a child's heart, then engaging their mind, and then giving them something to do with that. So a reminder to connect to students and allowing them to connect to one another through community building, and how that's a loving and wise way to support our new and emergent plurilingual students. Thank you so much, Mr. Marquez. We're gonna now transition to Miss Marlene Ruvalcaba to share out on EL plurilingual jigsaw strategy.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor, for pronouncing my last name correctly. It's a good start. So yes, I'm here to talk about plurilingual jigsaw, the speed I accidentally say speed dating, but it's speed friendship activity. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I am Marlene Dorncava. This is just an image of kind of to understand what it is, but to truly understand, we would go to the next slide, which is the definitions. So speed dating, excuse me, speed dating is a social activity designed to spark creative conversation to lower the threshold for talking with strangers. In other words, an organized event that has the goal to make connections with others in a timely manner. I find it kind of nice to have two definitions, which is why I placed two definitions. So yes, I hope that explains what speed friending is. So if we can go to the next slide. And for the sake of the prompt, because we have 5 minutes, I'll only be going over the 3 questions that we were discussing to speak about. But this is just for you guys. If you guys have any ideas of questions to ask each other, these are just a few questions that we can ask. And the next slide is questions we can ask specifically to younger children, just to get them understanding like who they are as a person, just like quick things that they can perhaps understand better. When you compare it to like asking adults questions, it's a little bit different. So, and then the next one, speaking of adults, these are deeper questions. If we're kind of in a college, perhaps environment, or even high school, we can talk about more in depth what it is that we want to know about each other. For example, how do you feel? How do you view yourself? I think that's very important to communicate with others. And the next one, questions to ask to support plurilingual learning. So this is specifically for students who know multiple languages, or maybe perhaps we can ask students who don't know multiple languages, what languages would you want to speak and why would you want to speak them? And if so, how would you learn to speak those languages? So these are just a few questions, again, just for helpful ideas, like what languages you speak. We can talk about what their parents' native tongue is, which I find very important. And another important thing that I'd love to ask students is if they write and read those other languages. Because me personally, I'm fluent in English and Spanish, but I am not the best writer in Spanish. I have to work on that. And then there's not much signing. There's not much reading in sign language, so, but I'm fluent in that as well. So we go to the next slide. And then how might a student use it to learn? It supports students to know and tell their story. It helps students engage in civics with wisdom and compassion. I got that from the Canvas quote you were saying, Professor. And students can learn from other people's stories. Students can feel understood, seen, and cared for, and students can relate to others. It's just kind of helpful to understand other people's stories, to know that we're not alone and perhaps we go through similar things, just to unite us. And the next slide, please, is how might a teacher use it in a classroom? It can help build connections amongst the students, creating a healthy and comfortable environment. It's always nice to kind of learn and teach in a classroom where everybody is kind to each other and understands each other's stories. And it can help students, it can help the teacher to get to know the students on a deeper level, just a bit of their story, where they're coming from, perhaps what are some things that may prevent them from being the best in the classroom, performing their best, which is, I think, very nice for when students get to know when teachers get to know their students deeper. And teachers can practice their time management skills, which is kind of a random one, but because it is a timely activity, they can learn how to be kind of straightforward and a bit strict when it comes to time. And thank you for listening. If anybody has any questions, but thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Miss Marlene Ruvalcaba. What a wonderful reminder how speed friendship can be varied to different age groups. It could be for adults, college students, really deeply thinking about our own identity, to elementary school students. So it's a strategy that can be used across the board, and we saw that modeled so well. So we thank you and appreciate you. And now we move on to Mary Bernstein. Mary Bernstein has another activity which we'll be focusing on. I believe it's the daily emotional check-in. Socio-emotional learning is so important these days. Mary Bernstein, what insights do you have for us?
Hi, thank you, Dr. Kim. So you can stay where you are on that Google form. So a daily emotional check-in is basically a check-in that teachers can do at the beginning of the day to help them gain an understanding of where their students are emotionally that day and how ready they are to learn. I believe that students' emotions play a huge part in their ability to learn and focus. If there's something going on at home, tension in a friend group, a family situation, stress from school, it can directly affect students' ability to perform in class. I kind of believe in a holistic approach to learning, where teachers should not only look at the academic side of learning, but look deeper to the emotional, the kinesthetic side of learning. The daily check-in can help teachers gauge where their students are each day. When a teacher can better understand a child as a whole, they can better prepare themselves to meet the students where they're at that day and adjust lessons if needed. This strategy is particularly helpful for teachers who are working with plurilingual students. Plurilingual students may need extra help in certain areas, but may not feel comfortable asking for that help in front of all their peers. This daily check-in gives the students a space to share privately with their teachers if there's any confusions they may have. So there's a few different questions on the daily check-in to gauge student readiness. So they have a couple different options of how to express their feelings. So you can scroll down to the photos part of the form. So this is totally flexible. You can do it, I did it with puppies. You can do it with emojis, you can do it with colors, you can do it with different weathers. Students pick a photo of how they feel that day, and then below the photos, there's a section where they can explain why they chose that photo. Why did that certain picture explain how they were feeling that day? Below that question, there's a place where they can rate their feeling of readiness for that day. So if a certain student's really ready to learn, it'd be a 5, and then going down depending on how they're feeling that day. The next question is specific for students who may have missed something the day before, whether they weren't at school or something didn't make sense to them. They may, if it's the day after they learned it, they may start feeling worried, like, oh, geez, I didn't pick up on that yesterday. This gives them the space to bring up anything that they may not have understood the day before. And then the last spot is a spot for students to ask or tell the teacher anything, whether that be something going on in school that's hard that they need help with, or even something to celebrate. Students love when teachers celebrate their victories with them. And it helps you as a teacher better connect with your students when you're involved in what's going on in their lives. And that is my strategy.
Wow, and what a powerful strategy that is, Miss Mary Bernstein. I don't think I've ever seen a check-in with these adorable puppies. And what puppy do you feel like today? Once again, when we look at students, sometimes it can look like they're doing well, but Miss Mary Bernstein reminds us that we need to know how every student is feeling, and this check-in can be one way to do that. And supportive of our new and emergent plurilingual students who may not feel comfortable raising their hands. At this time, I'm gonna hand the baton over to Mr. Emmanuel Guerre. He'll be sharing about the picture book strategy at this time. Mr. Emmanuel Guerre.
Hey, conference. Thank you so much for having me. As you can see, I'm presenting on picture book, and it's pretty much self-explanatory, but there's much more that goes to picture book than just a book full of pictures. It is, as you can see from Read, Write, and Think, they say wordless picture books offer a wonderful foundation for creative writing. Often students struggle with the ideas and topics for writing. This genre of book offers a platform for students to develop their writing skills. And so, as you can see, picture books offer creativity among students, especially plurilingual students. They could write in different languages. And so on to the next slide, you can see how by implementing picture books in the classroom, the strategy picture books, it meets the criteria for the Common Core State Standards. Some of the criteria are develop the topic with relevant, well-chosen facts, definitions, concrete details, quotations, and other information and examples. It also use appropriate and varied transitions to create cohesion and clarify the relationships among ideas and concepts. I'm not going to go through all the Common Core State Standards, but it meets a wide range of them. On to the next slide. Picture books come in all shapes and sizes. As you can see on the left, there's a lot of genre when it comes to picture books. There's fantasy, there's fiction, and it's not just for a small age group. You can see in some of these that it ranges from 6th to 9th grade, which is pretty high level classes up to high school. And if you don't have the resources to purchase picture books, on the right, you could see someone just drew up a little picture book. And that's a super creative way of doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel Garay. And just a reminder that for our new and emergent plurilingual students, just because they might not have the vocabulary in a new place that they're in, doesn't mean they're not deep thinkers. And oftentimes, picture books can be a way to express thinking and ideas, deep thinking and ideas, when the vocabulary is not is still being learned. So really great approach. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna hand it now to Mia. We're gonna pass it over to Mia. I'm gonna go ahead and open up Mia Gendrew on the EL Plurilingual Jigsaw, using picture books to teach Bible stories. Handing the baton to Mia Gendrew.
Hi, everyone. And thank you, Manny, for introducing picture books ahead of time. I actually love that I go after Manny because I have a practical way of how you can use picture books in the classroom. So, and another way to explain picture books is basically in our textbook, it says that a teacher can read a story to the class and they can have pictures with it. And so as they read the entire story, they can go back to it by picture and maybe even divide it into groups where each group is focusing on one picture so that they can learn more about the story. So this is a practical lesson where I actually used this last week, and I used picture books to teach my Bible stories. So this is something that you can do at any age level. I've done it with kindergarteners. I'm doing it with 5th grade. It makes the lesson more engaging, and it causes students to have a deeper learning of the story versus you just reading the story and asking for feedback at the end. So what I would normally do is I use, Dr. Kim, if you can click the link below, it's called freebibleimages.org. This is an actual lesson that I did last week with Abraham and Isaac, and you can click on this link. You can use it for any Bible story. We did Abraham and Isaac. You can do the middle one with yes, perfect. So these are actually just slideshows. You can read the Bible itself and go picture by picture, trying to match it. Some of them might have a slideshow where it actually has one sentence underneath that you can read depending on the age level group. But this is a great resource for anyone that would like to maybe teach a Bible lesson and get more from the students. So this is how I would actually use it as a teacher inside the classroom. And so we can go back into, if we can go back into the Google slide, Dr. Kim. So the way the students can use it to learn is that, and so we use depth and complexity icons to help them dig deeper into a story, such as the story of Abraham and Isaac. And so if you look at the icons on the right side, you'll see there's language of the discipline. I won't go through all of them, but the main things that normally teachers would use is they could ask for details. So as each group gets a picture, usually I would print these out for them. I would give them a picture, and then I'll say, as a group, check how the facial expressions are on each image. What details can you get from how they look? Or maybe they can talk about multiple perspectives. If you see the glasses below, they can come up with sentences of what Isaac was feeling at that moment or what Abraham was feeling at that moment. So these are just examples of how, and they can use Post-its to put their answers on each image. And towards the end, it permits, they can share to the class what they learned in each of their slides. So I feel picture books is just a great way to teach any grade level how to understand English without having to read too many words and being able to be comfortable to share with the class the things that they learned during that time. And that's my presentation. Hope you learned something new.
Thank you, Ms. Drew. Once again, another reminder and another application of using picture books as a way to support new and emergent plurilingual students. Well, everyone, congratulations. Well done on this conference. Once again, for our EDUG 508 students, we began a short 4 weeks ago out of a 5-week class, and already students are presenting strategies on how to support new and emergent plurilingual students. If we were to go back 4 weeks ago, and I would ask, how comfortable do you feel supporting new and emergent plurilingual students? There may have been a number of folks who maybe were wondering, I'm not even sure what that is. But here today, they are presenting multiple strategies on how to support new and emergent plurilingual students. And next week, what the students will do is they'll have the opportunity to actually create a toolkit of the strategies they really feel that they would use, so that when they enter the classroom, not only will they have learned the strategies, but they will have with them a digital and virtual toolkit that they could pull out anytime to support their new and emergent plurilingual students with love and wisdom. Congratulations on our first mock Love and Wisdom conference.